again, everyone, and welcome to the Philly Factor. My name is Paul Perella. We are joined today by author Kyrie McCauley. Was the author of the William C. Morris Young Adult Debut Award winner, If These Wings Could Fly. She joins us to talk about her new book, We Can Be Heroes. I had the opportunity, I can't believe it was back in September that we actually talked about your book for a radio interview. And here we are on television talking about your book. So thanks for your time. And thanks so much for joining us here on the Philly Factor to talk about your new book.
Thank you so much for having me. I think my mind is still in September, so I can't believe we're already in November here. But I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I wish in some respects that it was still September, because that means we would have so much time to prepare for the upcoming holidays than literally being a week or two, from the start of the holiday season. But time marches on. So how has been the reception? How has the reception been to your new book, We Can Be Heroes?
It's been really great from everything that I've heard and I've encountered. This is actually my second pandemic book release. So I feel like we're still kind of in uncharted territory in terms of publishing and how to promote books from home. So it's a little tricky because I don't get the face-to-face interactions with readers that a lot of authors usually have and get to, have that experience. But I get incredible messages from readers. They reach out to me by email and on my social media and send me their thoughts on the books or tag me in their reviews sometimes. So I've been able to get some insight and it's been pretty positive. So I'm excited about that.
Well, that's good. So how has the pandemic, how has that affected you or impacted you as a writer? We've talked to other people on the show and they said that the pandemic has actually helped them in giving them desperately needed time to finish projects and to finish books. And of course, on the downside of that is that, authors can't get out to book clubs or to book signings and meet face to face with their fans. So how has this whole past 18 months to 2 years impacted you personally?
Well, I wonder if my experience is different because these are the only books I've released. So I've only released books in a pandemic. I don't know any different. I never attended conferences as an author. So I don't have that comparison to make. One thing that I do feel the lack of isn't so much interacting with readers, which of course I miss, but we can kind of engage in different ways online and through social media doing that. But to really find like a community of writers, and those would be my colleagues normally, and I would meet up with them at conferences or writing retreats, things like that, and we would be able to share our experiences with each other. So it's been a little sad to not have that. But I've got a great group of writing friends, and we've stayed in touch throughout the course of the pandemic. And we keep saying, maybe one day we'll be able to actually meet each other in person and meet up at the same writing conference or something like that.
Yeah, I think we're all waiting for that time. So desperately hanging on to that hope that time is coming soon. You mentioned this is your second book, We Can Be Heroes. Let's talk a little bit about the book. So when you set out to write We Can Be Heroes, was this a logical follow-up to your first book, If These Wings Could Fly, or are the two books and the characters pretty much standalones and separate entities?
They are separate entities. They're both standalone novels, but I will say that, a lot of the themes and the ideas that I wrote about in my first novel wove into the second one as well. So I thought that I was done writing about violence against women. And then I realized that I still had a little more to say, and that turned into We Can Be Heroes. So my first book really centered on like the family structure and what domestic violence in a home life looks like. Between two parents and from the perspective of a teenager living through that. And then in We Can Be Heroes, I really wanted to talk about dating violence among teens and some of the gun culture that teenagers today are interacting with within their schools.
Sure. You deal with a very serious topic and subject in We Can Be Heroes, and your audience is that young adult readership. You're not writing about anything that they're not familiar with. They're probably, even as we speak, in a school district somewhere across the country, students, confronted with some of these very real issues. So at first I would be inclined to ask, well, did you have to worry about, cushioning it or making it palatable that the readers weren't going to be freaked out or disturbed by the subject matter? But then I realized that these are subject matters that kids today are dealing with on a daily basis.
Absolutely. So, I mean, for myself, in terms of writing about these serious topics, and both books have centered on violence, and the second book, We Can Be Heroes, talks a lot about grief. So I really like to incorporate a couple of magical elements weaved into the story. And for me, that's a way to sort of buffer that content and make it so it feels just a little bit detached from reality, so that my readers can hopefully just come in and read it and enjoy it as a story, without being completely put off by the serious content and the nature of the books themselves. But in terms of that content, I don't think it's in any way too mature for them. I don't think it's anything that they don't face every single day, or the question of it. I know I have 2 young kids, and they've had to do their own lockdown drills. So this is a very relevant conversation to be having, I think, not just among adults, but also with children and teenagers.
Yeah, that's an important point. As you set out to write these scenarios that not only in We Could Be Heroes, but in your first book, I mean, how does the author in you balance the fine line between wanting to take a little bit of creative liberty with scenarios and situations, and balancing that with facts, with discussing perhaps some of these scenarios with professionals who might advise you, this might work, or if this was the situation, this is how the authorities would respond to, let's say, domestic violence or school violence. I mean, so, how do you balance that creative pursuit with reality?
Well, I think, I mean, for better or worse, this isn't my first career. My first career was actually in advocacy. So I spent a lot of time working in populations, in clinics that dealt with domestic violence and dealt with gun violence as a very real thing every single day. So I can draw from a lot of that experience and the knowledge of how the situations kind of escalate, what that actually looks like on a day-to-day basis. And both books kind of look at, in terms of violence, like this question of complicity. And if it's not an extreme act every single day, we kind of lose interest. So part of what I wanted to dig into in the stories was like, if it's not an alarming thing every single day, how do you notice these red flags? How do you see something escalating? What does that actually look like when you're in an unhealthy relationship? Because I think a lot of those signs can kind of get buried or dismissed pretty easily, especially for young teenagers, if this is one of their early relationships that they've ever had. So it was really crucial to me, even if I was incorporating magical elements and playing a little bit with the sense of reality in my stories, that the actual facts aligned with how those relationships escalate in real life. I wanted people to be able to recognize, oh, I know that red flag because I've seen it before. I saw it in my friend and her text messages, or I saw it at home from a parent, and be able to connect those dots into their real life.
So how do you segue then from this career in advocacy, like you just described, into a writing career? I mean, where do you make that decision that you might want to try something different, or you want to sort of parallel your experience in advocacy with a writing career?
It wasn't writing for me forever. For a long time, it was just reading. I was just an avid reader. It was what I did in my spare time. So books were a huge part of my life from the time I was really little. And I sort of dismissed the idea of writing for a long time because it felt like an unrealistic pursuit. And I thought I needed to get, a degree in something more tangible and pursue a career in something that was more realistic in my mind. And it wasn't until my child was a few years old and I was home with him while he was a baby and had a little bit of time to pursue something else, and I started writing just for fun. So for a little while, it was just like my own hobby, something that I did just because I enjoyed it, with no thoughts of pursuing it as a career. And it just kind of built, I fell in love with it from there.
Whenever I have an author like yourself on the program, I like to sort of get into the process and to get into their mind and find out how the whole process unfolds. Because in some cases, people have tried writing books for years and years and years and years, and they never even get past the mailroom at a publisher's office. So in your case, you have two books published in what would some people would consider a relatively short period of time, given the pandemic. But how many times were you rejected? And I don't like the word rejected, but that comes with the territory. When when you're an author and you send a manuscript, most oftentimes you're getting that rejection letter in the mail. So
Absolutely.
give us a little bit of what happened with you.
Yeah. So I started writing books in 2010. And then my first novel published in 2020. So even though it sounds fast, it took me a decade to get there. I had about 4 or 5 full manuscripts before the one that I published, and none of them made it farther than the agent's inbox. I think I probably had 150 or 200 rejections over the course of years in querying. So very much was about persistence. And for me, I was writing in a lot of different genres. I was trying everything that I love to read. So I was writing fantasy, I was writing middle grade, I was jumping all over the place. And it wasn't until I started writing these contemporary books that I really realized that was where I wanted to be. These were the topics I wanted to be writing about, and definitely just kind of like stumbled into the sort of projects I should have started with from the beginning, and figured out, my voice and what kind of stories I wanted to tell. And then I was in Pitch Wars, which is like a manuscript pitching contest. So that helped me find my agent. And I definitely recommend that writers who are interested in traditional publishing look into programs like that, because they usually come with a mentorship side. So you get to work with an experienced author and get their insight into the industry. So that was really helpful for me. But it wasn't quick. It seems fast. I wrote If These Wings Could Fly really quickly, immediately went into the contest, quickly found my agent from the contest. So that year was a whirlwind, but it was preceded by 9 years of just outright rejection and not going anywhere. So
yeah, so I have to ask, because somebody watching the show right now who might find themselves in a similar situation, they think they have that great manuscript and they're getting rejected and rejected and rejected. I mean, how do you rise above the rejection? Now, some people would say that it comes with the territory, whether you're in television, radio, if you want to make a movie, if you want to write a script, rejection comes with the territory. So what type of advice can you give authors, potential authors? What type of advice can you give them when it comes to that pile of rejection letters that, arrive in the mailbox?
Well, it does come with the territory, but I don't think that makes it hurt any less.
Sure.
What I will say, and it wasn't hard, it was not easy in the moment to feel this way, but looking back and looking at the manuscripts that I did end up seeing all the way through to publication, I will say that those manuscripts that ended up going nowhere were not wasted words. It wasn't wasted work. It wasn't like I put in hundreds and hundreds of hours and countless query letters to agents and shelved it, and then that just was a wasted moment in my life and nothing ever came out of it. I learned so much writing those novels, and they definitely were building blocks for understanding the publishing industry, understanding what kind of stories I wanted to write. And I don't think that I would have ever gotten to the books that I did publish if I hadn't faced all of those rejections on the earlier ones that sort of forced me to find my way to where I was supposed to be.
So and this often happens with authors, is that those previous manuscripts and those previous stories, as you said, they weren't wasted words, but you might find yourself in a position now that you could go back and look at those previous works, retool them or fix them or freshen them up, and might be able to get them published before no one would even look at them.
It's true. Yeah, I'm in a much different position in my career than I was a few years ago. And I can also use, the skills and the tools that I've honed in the last few years to go back with that eye for revision and for editing. And I can see mistakes that I made that a few years ago I couldn't see in my manuscripts. So it's a whole different perspective. I'm not sure that I would want to. I'm excited about the new projects they have going on instead of like going back into the different kinds of genres that I wrote in before. But it's nice to know that they're just there. It's not like they've disappeared. They're waiting for me if I ever want to dust them off and dive back in.
Sure. I want to talk a little bit about We Can Be Heroes, which is your new book. It's about friends and the untimely death of one of the three girls in the book, and the two unlikely friends embark on a mission to make sure that the death of one of the other girl, the third girl, doesn't disappear or doesn't remain unnoticed. So let's talk a little bit about the story and what these three friends sort of experience and ultimately what happens.
Absolutely. So, it's about these three girls that are navigating grief together. One of them is killed by an ex-boyfriend and then returns to her two best friends in the form of a ghost. So it was really important to me. And I played with the structure of this book a lot because the one thing I knew was that if my story was going to have a dead young woman, I wanted to give her her own voice. So I needed to navigate what that looked like for my storytelling and the kind of manuscript that I wanted to write. So in my case, I had her return as a ghost because it was important to me that she have, some agency in the story, that she have her own voice and this story told from her own perspective.
And the two friends, as I said, they were unlikely because would you consider the two remaining friends unlikely friends because they really didn't seem to get along, or they really weren't friendly with each other?
They weren't. Sort of they had a mutual friend and she was like the glue holding them together. But the two main characters are polar opposites in terms of what they want and how they act and really how they see the world. And then they had this mutual friend. And when the mutual friend dies, they find their first common ground ever. And it's in this desire to I sometimes refer to it as vengeance, but it's really just this desire for awareness about what happened to Cassie. And it was definitely inspired by, this culture we're living in right now with gun violence, where it's this flashing red news story across our phones and across the news. And then the next day there's another one. And we can barely process one trauma before we've moved on to the next. And that's what they were seeing. But this time it was their dearest, closest friend who they missed every single day. So they have this moment of reckoning where they're saying this isn't right, not just what happened to her, but how fast we've moved on from it, how quickly the world forgot, how for the rest of forever, her name will be associated with this horrible thing that happened to her and not the person she was.
So what do you hope people then, readers, young readers in particular, take away from this story? Because I think, and we've all heard the professionals say, we're becoming desensitized to all this violence that is out there. I mean, I'm not telling anybody anything that they don't know. Every day here in Philadelphia, there is not one, but two or three or four or more stories involving gun violence, deadly gun violence, and yet nothing seems to be getting done. We have become sort of desensitized to it all. And I think in some way, your book wants us to remember that these people that are suffering at the hands of gun violence, they were people, they were alive, they were contributing members of society, and that we need to remember them, and that we can't desensitize ourselves to this epidemic of gun violence that we have in society today.
Absolutely. And, this is one of the reasons that I particularly love writing for teenagers. And right now, I think that this generation of teenagers is facing some unimaginable challenges, and they're incredibly engaged. I was not scrolling a cell phone in between classes when I was 16 years old and learning all of the headlines and all of the news stories about violence, and being terrified about a shooting that happens across the country again and again and again. So I think that their exposure every single day is going to lead them to being a little bit more engaged and aware and active about these issues than previous generations were, because they don't really have a choice. It's in their face every single day. They can't just ignore it. So I love writing for them for that reason. And then in my stories, what I really want to lay out is not just this is a sad thing that happens, but here is a pathway for change. So the teenagers in my story, this isn't just grief and anger, it's activism. They are creating murals around their town in memory of their friend. And the murals are meant to raise awareness and start some conversations about gun violence, but also about dating violence. It was Cassie's ex-boyfriend that killed her. So they're asking these questions of what signs did we miss? What was there that no one was seeing or not responding appropriately to because they thought it was young love, and sort of just taking the entire situation more seriously than people do. So for me, that was a roadmap. These are real things that teenagers can do. They're online and they're engaged and they're raising awareness about things that are important to them. And for me, that's a message of hope, to say this isn't a scenario where nothing can change ever. You might not have all of the tools, but in a couple of years, they're all going to be voting, and they'll have a little bit more power in how we affect change on these issues.
So when you set out to write not only this book, but your earlier book, sometimes people just sit down and write a book because they want to entertain their readers. I suspect in your case, you wanted to write a book, but in the back of your mind, there was also a message of advocacy and empowerment that you wanted to give your characters in the hopes of influencing your readers. So not only are they reading a good book, but also perhaps you as the author are hoping to instill in them the possibilities that they're not going to be desensitized to the violence, that they are going to become advocates like yourself, and are going to stand up for when they see something that is wrong in the hopes of making it right.
Absolutely. And, I don't think that I'm saying anything to them that doesn't ring true in some way as something that they've seen. And maybe they've seen it dismissed really casually. And that's why it was really important to me to show like red flags escalating in severity. So, and in If These Wings Could Fly, it's about domestic violence at home, but there aren't actual violent incidents until almost the end of the book. We're talking about emotional abuse and what that looks like and how that is dangerous and what it can escalate into. So for me, it was just as important to say, we can't be in every single home, but a book could be. And knowing that the books are in a library and that a kid can take them home and find something in those pages and connect the dots to their own life and make themselves or their friends safer because of it, I thought that was important and worth pursuing. And I'm a survivor of domestic violence, so I would have loved to have had a book like that on my library bookshelves when I was 16.
Sure. One final question, and we're short on time here, but how has this whole experience then with writing these two books and knowing that you're making an impact on young readers, how important is that for you? How has this impacted you, knowing that you are affecting change through your writing for these young readers?
It's incredible, but it's also a little intimidating. It's a huge responsibility. And I think having come from the perspective as a survivor and then again as an advocate and having seen all of these different perspectives, it really just drove home to me how important it was to write these issues realistically and honestly, even if I was weaving them into stories with a little bit of magic or something that played with reality. It was really, really crucial that I don't twist the truth about domestic violence or dating violence. So that had to come from a place of complete honesty because of the responsibility that I felt in talking about those serious issues. But on the flip side, like the emails and the messages that I get from readers who do see themselves in these stories is hugely rewarding and absolutely makes me want to keep writing books like this.
So as we look forward to your writing in the future, I'm sure you're probably working on one or two other books, or if not more now. Not that you're going to tell us what's coming next, but has this whole experience with writing, has it lived up to everything that you thought it was going to be?
Oh, far beyond it. I think it still feels really surreal too. And I can count on one hand the number of times I've been able to be in a bookstore, and see my books on a shelf. So every time it feels like this whole new novel, amazing experience to go in and actually see that, especially publishing in the pandemic and writing during lockdown. I think it makes me appreciate those experiences a little bit more. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard, and balancing it at home with two young kids last year was very difficult. But again, like the outcome has been so rewarding.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us on the program, and let people know that both of your books are available. Again, the new book is "We Can Be Heroes" is available, and Kyrie's first book, "If These Wings Could Fly," again, also available. I want to wish you continued success. Thank you so much for being with us here on the program, and I look forward to speaking with you again sometime in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here.
All right. Until the next time, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us here on the Philly Factor. My name is Paul Perello. We'll catch you around the next time.